Well, good afternoon, everybody. This is Daryl Gay. I'm a partner at Aaron Fox, Labor and Employment Law. I'm here with my buddy and partner in crime, Jay Jamrog, from I4CP. We're going to bring you a session today we hope you find interesting. We have a few people still joining us. I'm allowing a little bit more time. I'm actually filling space to allow people to come and join us in as they pop in. But I think you'll find the session interesting. If you have questions, what we ask you to do is to enter them in the Q&A box, and either G or I will notice them and pull them up and bring them up to the attention of our body here. But Jay, would you take the time to introduce our guest today?
Sure. Yeah. First, I'd like to introduce a good friend of mine, Kevin Woolley. Kevin currently serves as Executive Leadership Fellow at the Carlson School of Management at University of Minnesota. I'm very impressed. Where he teaches applied leadership and at several graduate courses. Prior to his semi-retirement, I don't call you retired because you're so active, you're more active than I am. You had 34 years career of leadership and talent development at both General Electric and General Mills. Good training grounds. Your Crotonville, sorry to see it disappear, but that was a great place at one time. So Kevin's most recent book, Coachability, and you should show it, Kevin. Leadership Superpower was published in the fall. And it was recognized as a Gold Award winner by the North American Book Association. That's not the only book. He's a prolific writer, so he has other books that are out there. Didn't you write something about cupcakes?
Yeah, that was a little journal article. So maybe we'll talk about cupcakes later. But thanks for all that, Jay. I'm looking forward to the conversation. But I also would add that I work with you with the Institute for Corporate Productivity. So love the research, and I keep learning. And got a chance to meet Paul as part of that.
Yeah, Paul is part of it too. So I pulled in Paul because Paul he leads enterprise learning at Ecolab, and I'll put in a plug for Ecolab. It's one of the better run companies that we have a large membership, and Ecolab gets our Next Practice Award winner more than probably any other company. It's a very well run company, great mission, etc. So he has had a long career. Of course, now he's executive learning at Ecolabs. Before that, in his current role, he also led global enterprise excellence programs and management at the PMO program. Prior to joining Ecolab, Paul was an analyst and process involvement at Express Scripts and Lean Six Sigma Black Belt. Great career. He fascinating. Like I like what people majored in because he majored in French. When I first went to school, I majored in art. So it's a wonder what we major in when we first go to school and what we end up doing. But he's doing terrific work, and I picked him because of the work he is doing at Ecolab and the story that they have around their talent development and leadership development program. So both Kevin and Paul are friends also and know each other well and know their programs well. So Daryl, I'll kick it off. Why don't you kick off the questioning of our panel?
So guys, I think we're approaching this from a little different angle than most people expect us to approach it to. We've had some prior programs talking about the availability of talent, how you find talent and how you develop talent. Obviously there's some concerns about a lot of people on this call will talk about how do I enhance my employees' performance. And we're sort of talking about management leadership. So give us your perspective. Which is it the most important to a company? Is it the finding the right talent? Is it finding how to make your employees perform correctly? Or is it management leadership, or is it all the above?
Well, I'll start. My answer, Daryl, is yes. I think it's all the above. I do think that, at some point a company has got to say, we've got to get a few things right. And you talked about the management development or managed leadership development. It was about 7 years ago where our company said we have to get our first line managers right. We got to make sure that those folks know how to do what they're doing, and they have that. It's not about the clicks or the tools, etc. It's about the mindset. It's about their ability to support and coach their teams. It's really about their ability to lead and lead a team effectively. So we just felt like I think at some point every company's got to say we've got to get that manager role right to make sure that we're developing our talent internally and that they find a lot of opportunities here so that when we get them here, they want to stick around and grow.
Yeah, before you jump in, Kevin, just a quick note on, we did research on leadership development. We do a lot of research on leadership development over the years, primarily because most companies say it isn't very effective. What we found though, that the lower you go down in the organization to start leadership development to the first line supervisor is where you have a high correlation with leadership effectiveness later on. If you wait to start leadership development programs at mid-level and above, it starts to have a negative correlation with leadership effectiveness. So when you have your biggest bang for a buck, Paul, is exactly what you're doing. And I don't know if you got that hint from our research or not, but kudos for doing that, because that's a hard thing to do.
Thank you. We knew it was the right first thing to do. It was a little painful, honestly, because not having that next line of leadership, not having focus on them first, the first few folks who went through that initial development program, they kind of went back to the wolves a little bit, and so it took some time. And the very next thing we did was develop that next level leadership program, which I think it ties in exactly what Kevin, you're talking a lot about. We call it leader coach, right? So it's all about being able to coach and being able to coach your teams and coach them for a lot of different reasons. So,
Yeah, you set you up very good, Kevin. So what's your answer to Daryl's question, and especially on the coachability thing?
Yeah, Daryl, do you want to say something, or do you want me to answer that question first?
Answer the question, I'll come up with my second
Yeah,
question.
I love Paul's answer and their practice. I love that research. And again, I think Daryl's question's a trap. In that, is it this or is it that or is it that?
I'm a lawyer.
Yeah, okay. And I'm on the witness stand right now. So here's what I'm going to answer. Are you ready? I think it speaks to it, kind of, if you will, the paradox and the priority of being a leader today at any level. And that is, it's not just one thing. You got to keep your eye on a couple things, and you've got to continue to work your own skills in a couple areas. To me, the trick is always, are you willing to step back and think about what's important now? Is it selecting the right people? Is it getting them to perform well? Is it engineering the environment so we perform well? Yeah, all important. Am I having an impact on my consumers, my society, community, all that? And I think the one thing that I would hope to get across in this broadcast is that notion about the best thing you can do is, be on podcasts like this and do some listening, but do some own thinking about, right, what's important now? Is it this or is it that? And then drive it hard.
Yeah.
So Paul and Kevin, we talked about training and giving leadership development, but so many clients I know and companies I've dealt with, they make people the supervisor or manager or this title, that title, because they've been in the company for a long time or because they're really good at their job. I think it's important to speak when we talk about leadership development, what does that really mean? Does it just mean knowing how to produce the product well? Or does it talk about knowing how to manage the employees and deal with the different factors that affect how employees perform?
Well, I'll start with, I think it's all about the leader's mindset. I think, and in fact, our manager program, the first thing we talk about with them is the leader's mindset. We talk about how important it is as a leader to have a different mindset when you're thinking about the work. And a lot of the work is not the work that you had done before. It's how do you elevate and how do you support the team and how do you think about your talent differently, and how do you coach and make sure that they have what they need to perform at the same level you were able to perform. And that's a whole different skill set. And so we spend a lot of time talking about our leadership model, the mindset shift that when it comes into, how do you think about coaching your team? How do you think about making sure that they know what they need to do? But it all starts up, between the ears, personally, for every one of those folks who got to change their mindset.
And Kevin, he mentioned coaching a couple times. You have developed, I'm not going to give you a plug or anything like that, but a pretty good coachability assessment tool.
Mm-hmm.
would you think, answering and relying on Daryl's question of those people who are being promoted for the first time into a leadership role, do you recommend that, you know, a lot of companies have psychological assessments, all kinds of assessments, Hogan assessments, all kinds of stuff. And I know some of them are good, but some of them are kind of hokey. Where do you come down on all this stuff?
Yeah, and plug away, by the way. I'm an independent author, so any plug here would be good. But I'm going to go back to Paul's point and Daryl's question for a second. I think that it's a big transition in a company when you go from individual performer to manager, to the boss, supervisor, et cetera. And Daryl's right. I mean, oftentimes what sticks out is someone that's performing really well, that's really smart, can get things done. Yep, there's the new boss. And I think what Paul talked about is stepping back and saying, all right, what do we expect of someone at that level? Mindset, skill set, et cetera. And then how do we help them get there? And Jay, whether it's assessments or other things, I think it starts with the game's different. And I would just add that the two graduate courses I teach at Minnesota is the business school leadership course for the executive MBA and also executive course for supply chain leaders. And the first thing I talk about is your next transition, because whether it's frontline to first line manager or to middle level or to senior executive, you're going through transitions. And I think you've got to signal that when you're a first time leader. Kevin's three questions. What do you need to let go of? And for frontline, what you need to let go of is doing the work yourself, right? Then the second question is, what do I need to add? And I think Paul's an example of a company that does a great job, not only setting expectations of here's what we want for our leaders, but then giving the training and the role modeling. And Daryl, I think you'd agree that that's important to have good role models at all levels. And then finally, third question. So questions, what do I need to let go of? What do I need to hold on to? What I need to add on to? But then also, what do I need to hold on to? Because I think, what people really pine for nowadays is very authentic people that they're working with. And I think the transition to a leader is not only learning new skills and meeting new expectations, but also holding on to who you are and what you value. And I think authentic leadership is, Paul, probably part of what you're doing in your program as well.
Yeah, that's really
Yeah,
good.
there's a lot of introspection, about, hey, when it comes to getting things done, when it comes to making decisions, managing your time, building relationships, the courage you're going to need in the role. You think about what was true for me when I was an individual contributor, and now what's different for me as a manager. There's just a lot to think about and a lot for folks to get their head around and do differently. So we spend a lot of time on that.
So I think if I could just
go ahead.
I could just add to the three questions that I think that the underlying theme, going back to your question, Jay, is more and more I'm promoting that when you're selecting or coaching people for performance or growth is to have them tap into how coachable are you? How much are you in that learning mindset as opposed to I'm in a doing mindset or a proving mindset? And we need those as well. But more and more it's like, is this person adaptable? Do they keep learning? Do they keep challenging themselves? And big question, can they take tough feedback well?
It's a little bit of Carol Dweck there you just threw in about the learning mindset versus the fixed mindset. And Daryl, could I ask a question before you jump in? I know you
Please do.
Let me ask a question on this. A lot in the press today about the falling productivity. And they're blaming everybody. I mean, we've had one of the biggest productivity drops we've had in a long time. I have my opinion of why, but I'm not going to say it right until afterwards. But a lot of the criticism has been around managers have been too empathetic during the pandemic, and that they've been too easy on employees, and they haven't, and they've not really pushed for the productivity that they have. And the productivity drop has happened because all of a sudden they're switched off and they're demanding more productivity. Paul, where do you in your company stand on this confluence of empathy and productivity?
Yeah, I think it's a false dichotomy. It's just completely false. You get the most productivity from your team when you really invest time in them. You understand where they're coming from, what they need, where they want to go in their career, what works well for them, and what's a chore and a cheer for them. You can really get the most out of your team when you're the most empathetic with each of your team members. And so I'll just reject the premise and say, No, you get the most productivity by having the most empathy, and you can live in that world of, just hammer people and you'll get, malicious compliance, but it's not gonna last.
I think
It's
a
not.
purpose-driven culture, which you have there at Ecolab, also plays a big part in
Yep.
blending the two, because you have a tremendous purpose-driven culture there too.
Yeah,
So we have
very-
a question on the program where someone has asked us that given the fact that a lot of people, as we said earlier, get promoted because of their tenure. And if the line employees think they need someone who's being coached more, getting direction, how do they convey that to the company? They need that. We need training. Other than just saying anything, what you guys
Yeah,
have. on that?
Kevin, that's a good question. How do you convey that? How do you know it first? And then how do you convey it to the rest of the organization that, hey, I would like a little training to be better at this job as being a leader?
Yeah, I think that, back to the kind of what's in my coachability book is a study I did. We looked at 200 leaders on to what degree they were learners, they were coachable and wanted to grow versus their confidence. And the question was, as confidence increases, what happens to your coachability? And what we found is, number one, there's 3 spots: low confidence, low coachability. And I think for the question about, gee, I want to learn how to get better, but I'm afraid to ask, I think either it takes a little bit of confidence to go out and look for feedback or look for training, or the environment needs to support it. And I think having both, what Paul does in his company, both having programs, but having managers really with a mindset, I'm trying to build my managers, and how do I invest in them? And so I call it kind of once you get to the middle of that confidence coachability zone, I call it the learning zone. And I think we should both create an environment where people are willing to step up and say, I'd like to learn something new, or I'm not as good as I want to be on this, as well as
But how do you do that
tools.
and not seem weak, Kevin?
Well, again, I think it starts with a certain amount of confidence. Right. And when I looked at why coachability declines over time as a leader, one thing I see is I call it the false finish line, I've arrived mentality, and we've seen that. But also the what I call the superhuman stance, which is the hesitation to ask, because you're like, I've got to show up perfect. And there's been studies that show that if you've got a highly competitive, toxic culture, bad role model boss, it's hard to ask for help, right? Because everyone's putting up a false front. But behind that is the notion about, hey, we all have to get better. How do I keep learning here? Certainly the world keeps changing on us. As much as we'd like to have it stand still for a while, getting into that learning mode is important. So I think for an individual, know that in most places, you'll be respected by saying, hey, let me know what I'm doing well. I want to continue, but I'm looking for feedback on where I can get better, or I've got a couple skills I'd love to fine tune. Final comment. If you can't have that discussion with your boss, but it's important to have, I think having another support person, whether it's a mentor, a friend, inside, outside the company, is you can keep on that learning edge. Hopefully it's your manager. And certainly if you're working with Paul's firm, you're going to get a lot of well-skilled, right mindset leaders to work with. But otherwise, I'd say, to have a network that can help you learn and get better.
Yeah.
So question, you guys. We talking about coachable leaders, this coachable that. I'm a company exec. I'm hiring a new person. What do I look for? How do I identify which of my candidates is quote unquote the best at being coachable?
Well, I guess I'd start with, when I think about coachability, I think of that as the next step. And the first step is learning to coach, being a good coach, and understanding what it means to be a good coach. I think is the first step. And so I guess what I'd say, Daryl, first of all, is you want to kind of understand that. How do you coach your teams? What kind of process do you use? What kind of things do you ask? How do you set up a good coaching conversation? Those are all things that are really important. Do you have some go-to questions that you use?
Paul, can you get to that during the hiring process?
I think you can ask. Yeah, I think you can ask. How do you coach your teams? What do you do to support them? What's your approach and process?
Yeah.
We have a model we use that is all about asking questions. It's all about creating receptivity, having an open dialogue. And if you don't hear those things, then red flags. I think you've got to start saying, oh, okay, but that's just step number one. Can you coach? Step two is, can you be coached? Are you coachable? And I think that's a harder one to sniff out. Kevin?
I just build on that. I think back to the, asking some interview questions and looking for evidence about, do they just, hammer their employees to get the work done, or are they also saying, hey, we've got a goal to reach, but I want to help you grow and develop at the same time. How are they doing that? How are they coaching? But then at the same time, for example, 2 questions. Number one, tell me about a time you had to give an employee tough feedback. How did you approach it? How did you handle it? And then tell me about a time you received tough feedback. How did you handle it? What did you do about that? My simple model of what is a coachable leader has got 2 parts. The first part, as Paul talked about earlier, is a mindset. And it's a mindset of continuous self-improvement. I'm not finished. I want to get better. And I think you can look for that in interviews as well. That notion about, I want to present myself either as the perfect candidate for the job, or as I love calling it, ready enough. I'm ready enough for the job, but I'm not perfect. And I think that the people that bring that drive for learning and self-improvement show itself as they tell their career story.
Yeah, I was asked by students many times about being prepared for your job. And I tell them, I've never been prepared for any job that I've taken. I've learned very fast, and I was very coachable, but I was not, quote unquote, prepared to go in to be a perfect employee.
Yeah.
So.
And I think those aspects of agility, that learning mindset, you talk about the future and future proofing. Those are the things that we're going to be, that we look for in talent, right?
Let's follow up on that about the future, Paul. Let's start there.
Yeah.
And you brought up about the future. I'm a futurist, so I want this conversation. We're in a very turbulent time right now, very inconsistent. There's war, pestilence, disease, and chaos everywhere. And the future of the workforce, the workplace, and et cetera, is in flux. So let me, Paul, if you don't mind, if I could ask Kevin first. Tell me about the future of leadership, Kevin.
Yeah, if I would have probably announced that in January of 2020, I would have been dead wrong. So it's always hesitant to say, oh, yes, I can see it. But, as I think about, working with, the students I do, business people coming back for an executive MBA or, other coaching I've done, I kind of would have a list of quick 5 things. And I think we've covered them. But, if you had to ask me, I'd say, first of all, what we've seen the last 2 years continues, that leaders need to consider agility, innovation, reinvention. It's an ongoing process. So I think the notion about the future is going to ask you to do things differently than you're doing today.
Daryl and I have take conversations, private conversations about that between.
Yeah, but that number one, knowing the future is going to ask for different things. So back to coachable, but being really agile, being innovative. And I think digital is part of it as well, but that would be one. As we talked earlier, I think talent builder. I'm not just about getting the job done, but I'm also building the future. As I tell my students, to me, the number one job of a leader is not getting the job done. That's job number 2. Job number 1 is building other leaders. That's what Paul's doing. That's what the better firms are doing in service of getting the job done and fulfilling your purpose. But it's like that mindset about, I'm a talent builder. And I think that's where coaching comes in. And Paul would agree with this. Coaching is not telling. That's a big shift. And I think and you can talk about that, but number 1, agile, future is going to ask for different things. Am I ready for it? 2, am I not only getting the job done, but talent builder? I think we've lost a measure of trust with our workforce lately. And I think getting back into the trust building game is also going to be part of it. Being transparent, being very clear on communication, being authentic, back to the empathy thing, all the great things you did to get us through the COVID, crisis. You got to keep doing those things, right? At the same time, and this would be my 4th one, is to engineer and inspire high performance. At the end of the day, our shareholders, our communities expect us to get the work done. And I don't think empathy means abandonment, by the way. It is flexibility. It's a new way of leading. But I think you got to capture the hearts and minds of the employees, building their talent, but at the same time, engineer success, giving them the resources, being very clear on the priorities, making decisions, right? Making tough calls. I think that's a big part of productivity too. And then to me, the final one is, what are you doing about yourself? How do you keep growing too? And that's where my coachability, but those would be my 5. So Jay's going to give me a grade on that. But in the meantime, I'd love to get Paul's version of that as you're building your leaders.
Yeah,
Before that, Paul, but I'd say one thing I want to kind of focus on that fourth one you mentioned, engineering inspire high performance. I think so many companies are very focused on that question. How do they get their companies to really enhance their performance? So Paul, we'll turn it to you, but I know that's something a lot of people in the poll are probably most concerned about.
But they missed the other four if they're only focusing on
That's
one.
why I want to make sure that other four is just as important as that fourth one is, but I want to make sure you guys integrate that point in very thoroughly.
Go ahead, Paul.
Yeah, I guess I'll put it in our own 4 buckets. And Kevin, you nailed it. We call it talent first. You know, thinking about my talent first, thinking about my talent differently. And I think if you go down to that manager level, it's thinking about my team and not how do I keep them in that job, but where is each one of those people going next? What's their next thing? What's the next step for each of those folks? And who's coming into that seat? Who are the people that I'm thinking about who are going to be my next candidates? So it's thinking about a different time horizon when it comes to your talent. So that's number one. Focusing, simplification, I think is a big area for us when it comes to leading for the future. There's a lot of digital in that. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of continuous improvement in that. The third one is for us, we call it mobilizing enterprise value, but really it's about how do we communicate value to customers in a different way as one Ecolab and communicate all the value that we deliver for them in their language. And then the last one, getting back to that learner's mindset, but we call it beginner's mindset. We have a company with a lot of experts, and I think a leadership trait is sometimes
a lot of scientists.
Yeah, right. And I think a good leadership trait sometimes is forget what you know and come at it with a mindset of a beginner. Think about things from scratch and approach situations that way. So
Kevin, Paul, you both know me well, and I'm big into data and analytics. And I love this whole concept, and I've been preaching it for years as managers, as developers of talent, and as a key component of their skills.
Yeah.
How do you measure that? I know how to measure the widgets that go out the door. And I can, so Kevin, I have got you on a P&L. I've got you on a performance review, and I can measure what's going out the door. I have a hard time measuring how well you're measuring building talent. And by the way, if you've built talent but don't get the widgets out the door, do you get a bonus?
Mm-hmm.
Well, back to Daryl's first question, is it this or that? Like, it's all of that. And that's what makes leadership tough, right?
I'm learning from Daryl.
Yeah, but I think also that's what, I'd say that's what,
number 3.
Yeah, I think that's what makes leadership special too. To take, to capture the hearts and minds and also accomplish great things, which we all need right now. So yeah. I think building more leaders is so important, and, building the leader in you the best you can be. I want to, back to the productivity thing. Can I tell a story for a second? I was back to, okay, so now we've got the leadership empathy thing. Let's talk about the performance thing. How do we do that? And again, do both well. It's not either or. When I was working at General Mills, we would rotate talent around in the marketing department. And we had this one brand, and I won't mention it, but it was in the dumps. I mean, nobody was buying this product. We were churning through management teams, and essentially, and off the record, we kind of gave up, said, okay, let's not put our high potentials in there. Let's put some brand new employees in there. So we had this group of these, kind of the fresh marketing people. They didn't know anything. They put them in the brand, and they asked the most amazing question. And the question was, when was this brand performing well? When was this brand a high performer? And what was going on? And why don't we just go back and do that? And it was like the idiot's question, like rather than create some great new product, it was like, let's go back to when we were winning, right? And to me, one of the questions that I bring forward, and by the way, the brand turned around amazingly. And we learned a lot about, fresh eyes and, having new talent go in there. But I think back to the performance thing, the question, if I were in a room saying we got higher performance, there's probably a lot of different moving parts we've got to look at. Right. Mm-hmm. But I would also ask the question about when we were really doing well, what was going on? What were we doing? What were others doing? And how is that relevant today?
Of the Culture Renovation book we published is really look at the past and what were you doing well in the past, and make sure that is some of the centerpiece of where you're going to go towards in the future.
Yeah, and if I just answer that a little bit is, if you went back to when it really worked well and how to get back to it, there'd probably be some common elements. One would be, think about the last couple of years. One would be, we were very clear on what needed to get done. So back to the clear on the goal, clear on expectations, working on things that were smart and urgent. That would be a part of it. The other thing I saw amazing during the whole COVID thing was the amount of collaboration across enterprise, as Paul, talked about enterprise value, that it didn't matter what level you were at. You were reaching out to all sorts of people to try to figure out, how do we run this thing? How do we run our companies from home offices? And, back to, and I think that notion about, outrageous collaboration is both great for the culture, but I think great for performance. So those would be two that I'd put out there.
Paul, what about you with measurement? You don't have to talk exactly about what you're doing, but how do you feel about the measurement?
Well, I guess I'll say this. Yeah, there's a lot of data that we can pull, right? Our folks sharing talent, where are they going? Are they going outside of the division, outside of a function, outside the market? There's a lot of data we can capture around that. I would say at the end, it's a couple things. It is looking at the talent that they've had and where have they gone. And I think we know. I mean, I guess, intuitively we know the folks that are driving and moving talent around and that are sharing talent. I think that's pretty evident to folks. The other thing I'll say is, we do talk engagement, and it's a serious metric for us. We want to make sure that our teams are not only engaged, but they're feeling included. They're feeling like this is the place that they want to be. One of our talent philosophies is we believe there's a world of opportunity inside of our growing company, and we live that by making sure that when we do our engagement diagnostics, we're asking about whether or not you have the opportunity for development, and that's a big word, opportunity, because it not only means there's content out there for you and there are chances for you to do it, but you feel like you have the freedom to go do those things, right? So there's just a lot built into that.
So Paul, do you ask that from the bottom up, every employee, or is it just certain levels of employees you ask that?
Everyone.
So let me ask you
we found in our research that if you're an exporter, a developer of talent, you become an exporter of talent. But you also are an importer of talent because more people want to work for you because you're a developer of talent.
That's right.
Yeah.
And hard to get that flywheel going, but once you do, there's nothing like it.
Yeah. Daryl, you had a question. Go ahead.
Yeah, guys, a lot of companies are using 360 systems. What do you guys think about that? What's your perspective on that? The use of it, not use of it, or some kind of innovation of that?
Tell me more. Tell me more when you say a
360. In other words, I'm going to evaluate the employee is going to evaluate me, all that kind of stuff.
All that, right? I'd say not as much. Yeah, you can read my face. Not as much a fan. It's on to us. It's really on that first line manager. They are the ones that are going to have to lead their teams. And we do get we get the engagement feedback, and we take that very seriously. But I think too much 360 just feels like, I don't know, to me feels like overkill.
I'll tell you a quick story of a CEO who wanted to do a 360. And so I went into his office to get the results. And the good comments on one side, the constructive feedback was on the other side. So I looked at it and I read down the first side and I said, real good. So Jay, you're supposed to look at the other side too. So I don't need to see the other side. I saw the good stuff. I don't need to see the other side.
So that was kind of the forerunner of Build on Strengths, which and by the way, just in full admission, I do use 360s versions of them in my program. And I think in a learning environment, I think they can be helpful. I tend to focus more on what are your signature strengths and how to build them. My studies would show that 1 out of 4 leaders have a low score. It's a fatal flaw. They've got to fix it. And I've done my derailment research. By the way, that's what led me to coachability, is derailed leaders lost their coachability. But I tell my students that you get this feedback. First of all, most of you are going to look at the wrong thing. You're going to look at those low scores, that quirky comment. And for most of you, not relevant, right? What is relevant is what could you be great at that's both you love doing and it's relevant to your boss and the company. And I think if 360s and feedbacks help do that, I think that that's very constructive. By the way, my own story on 360. So I was brought in many years ago as a helping out a friend doing some contract leadership development. We were working in a paper mill. They had gone through 3 years of 360s and training from the top to the bottom. And this was the very last class. Now, Paul will tell you that, when you're trying to get the last class, it's all the people that avoided training, right? So they brought Kevin in, right? So there was one individual, we'll call him George, okay? So George was a frontline supervisor, grew up in the plant from a janitor to running the off shift, tough customer, right? I'd seen his report. It was really negative, right? Like, oh boy, here we go. So I do my little introduction. We pass out the 360s. And then I say, well, what do you think? First hand that goes up is George. And he says the following, I'll never forget it. He says, I've never seen anything like this before. I'm looking at this report, and I got to tell you, it's the truth. It is absolutely the truth. I am surrounded by idiots 360 degrees. And to me, it's like, feedback's a tough thing to get through. I don't think I got through George that day, but yeah, there's a downside of 360. So.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, we use it we use it selectively. I believe in it for our leadership development programs when it makes sense. But I just, as a broad-based diagnostic for everybody in the company, I just don't. I think
there's a period of time, Kevin, probably you remember, and Paul, you may too, where they were actually doing 720s, and they would go out to external people that had contact with the individual to give their opinion to. I remember getting those in the mail and said, I'm not going to fill this shit out. I
think to me, the other thing I'll just add on this is, I think the instrument, the mechanism, if it's for development and you do it right with support, I think it can be useful. Yeah. There's some downsides, of course, but I think the overall intent is, as leaders, you have to know how you're coming across. Yep. You got to know how you're impacting people, and in a constructive way, what you're doing well, you should continue, and what could be even better. And I think there's a lot of other ways we can do that. Manager can be a coach, peers can be a coach, sensing tools, etc. But I think, as Daryl would probably say that, when the leaders get in trouble, they probably get out of touch with how they're impacting the workforce, and we need to help them get back to that.
Leaders in trouble thing. I love the listening strategies that are being implemented now in a lot of companies using technology and other ways of doing instant listening, both internally and externally company. But oftentimes you will get a bad leader, and you'll actually find it through a listening strategy, and do nothing about it. In fact, you make you promote him because he's made the dollars. Mm-hmm. And we talked about with that our culture, with healthy culture and toxic culture study, one of the things companies do is quickly address those bad leaders and either coach them up or politely let them go.
You got companies that are so worried about boarding being unionized or having lawsuits, but they pay no attention to the problems of the leaders you're talking about, as you're pointing out, Jay. And if you don't deal with that, then you do end up with ending the results you don't have. You have a unionized environment. You have tons of lawsuits. Really become problematic.
So in your leadership development programs, how do you address that kind of issue, Paul and Kevin, in your coachability book? We know it's important. It's come out as one of the key elements in our building a healthy culture is addressing it. How do you address it? How do you address it, Paul?
Well, I think we start with making sure that you think about how you coach and support your teams, again, in a different way, but really specifically, how do you provide feedback when someone is not performing well on your team? And what does that look like? How do you make sure that it's timely? We call it action impact, daily impact feedback. And it really is making sure that it's very clear when there's a feedback situation, how do you approach that? When there's a coaching for performance situation, because you've given feedback and it's become more of a regular situation, and you need to provide provide a supportive and a coaching to make sure that we're stepping back and we're thinking about what's really happening here and what's root cause. How do you approach that? And that is, it's used the same model, but it's separate from a development conversation where you're really developing your team and helping them grow, helping them do the next thing. So I guess the way I'll answer it is I think we're really clear about how you support your team, what you do differently as a manager, and how do you create an environment where feedback is welcome, feedback is regular, it's done, and coaching is done on the regular basis, and it's following an approach that we all agree on. And then, making sure that you take action when you need to, because you've got someone that's not creating that kind of environment.
You just can't let it go by. You got to take that. You got to take some kind of action quickly.
Yeah.
Kevin,
We talk about the impact that has on your team when we talk about it in managerial courage, right?
Yeah.
What impact does it have on your team when you don't do that? You're sending the same stronger message sometimes.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think Paul's got it right. But by the way, I mean, sometimes these are really very tough moments of truth. It's easy to get a management team in a room and say, hey, we're going to have a poster on our values. Let's create something, right? It's nothing to say, we got a good performer here, but there's really some bad behavior going on, and we have tolerated this. Are we going to keep? I mean, those are tough. Those are very tough conversations. But I will say that back to where my coachability work came from, I started studying very talented leaders that derailed and were terminated. And again, these were people that were talented, hardworking, got good things done, and then for some reason got over their heads. And I would do a postmortem. And I'd look at their personnel files, I'd interview their manager, et cetera. And there's always that question about, when I would talk to the manager, and this is after it happened, I'd say, did you know they were derailing? Yeah. How long did you know? Yeah, 6 months or more. Did they know? Did they know?
Yeah.
Usually it was either one of three things. Either they didn't have a clue because they were getting the feedback in the right way, as Paul would say, or two, they got the feedback and denied it, or three, they got the feedback, they wanted to do something, but they never got around to getting better. And I remember I'll finish with this. So I remember I was interviewing a very senior leader. One of his talented executives derailed and was like, not a good thing, right? So I'm doing the postmortem, again, in the spirit of how do we help avoid this, train employees, give better feedback, all that. And at the end, I said, so you knew the person was derailing, but it took 6 months or more to do something. They didn't know it or weren't working on it. What did that cost the company? And all I got was this sucking sound. Ooh, millions. And so back to that moment of truth, and to Paul's point, most of us, when we do, confront or manage a situation that leader's not behaving well and it's impacting our employees and the culture, it's easy to avoid. It's easy to take it lightly. But when you do act on it, either they get the message and they get better, or someone else needs to run the shop, and you realize, man, we should have done that a long time ago. I've never had a leader say we've acted too quickly.
So guys, one thing I see sometimes is I see a lot of companies. I do traditional labor law, so a lot of companies have the progressive discipline process, and I like to shift that to progressive performance enhancement, because I think one of the problems is they focus on, and to what you guys are saying, what the employee's done wrong, and a warning that if you continue doing it wrong, that you'll be fired or disciplined. And what I think they're missing, like respecting this, is I try to tell them, one, ask them, do they understand what the rule was? Ask them why did they violate it? Did they not know the rule? Did they not understand the rule? Did they just want to ignore the rule? What was going on? And then more importantly, so you get the employee to incorporate into making the change themselves. What is the employee agreeing to do going forward?
Yeah.
Yeah.
In the Q&A, one of the people asked about 360 again. Of if you're not doing 360, how do you know that that managers are going off the track, or that managers are not going? And I got to say, today's companies, the listening strategies that are being employed today are the ones we've been looking at as a next practice are really phenomenal. And you don't need, if you have a good listening strategy, and I call it, you're sensing, you get insights, and then you do action. And it's fast, and you go fast from sensing to insight to action. But there's multiple ways other than just an annual engagement survey. That's the starting point.
the listening strategy is tons of different ways,
Mhm.
to do a good listening strategy. And if anybody on this call would like a copy of some of the things we've done around listening strategy, I'd be glad to share. But and there's other organizations, consultants that sell listening strategies today. But I think there's some phenomenal work done in that area.
Yeah, I wanted to add one other thing because I think technology has helped us in a lot of ways. We have, for our leaders of managers, our class, our leader coach class, we actually run that digitally now. And it is really powerful because we can now easily record you coaching someone else in a practice session. And guess what? You have to watch that. And honestly, there is nothing like watching yourself in the fishbowl. Even if it's a simulated situation, you get to watch yourself in the fishbowl coaching someone else, and everyone else is watching you and giving you feedback. I would say there is nothing like that, right? And we used to.
I gotta agree. When I was in
Yeah.
grad school back in the Stone Ages, one of the side jobs I had was working at the Career Placement Center, and I developed what I called an interview diagnostic feedback center. And so people were having trouble interviewing for jobs or whatever, and I would tape them in a real interview session, and they would have to watch themselves.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And the looks on their faces like, I did that. I said
Right.
that. That's the expression I have on my face. I mean, it's
Yeah, and if you remember back in the day, you had to set up the tripods in the studio and
That's
the
right.
sound and all that, right? And now
It's
it's
so
on TV.
easy.
They're in the channel. Just record your meeting, and then it's available for everybody, and it's just amazing. So I just think that's just it was such an easy thing for us to do that has had a big impact.
Oh, wow. That's a great piece of advice, Paul. Thank you.
So Paul and Kevin, in fact, your book, you do a lot of discussing about the critical, you call it feedback, and talking to as coaching managers. Is it possible along that same line, and maybe what Jay just said, doing some critical feedback to line employees?
Yeah, and obviously in the spirit of if it's punishment, no. If it's in the spirit of development and clarifying things, absolutely. But and again, back to if you've got the great coaching skills that Paul's investing with his leaders, it's much easier to pass along that feedback and to give that coaching. So I think it starts with the mindset of the leader giving the feedback that I'm here to be helpful, to get the best out of you, to both get the work done and also help you achieve what you want to in your career. So I think it's that mindset. I'm here to help, and we need to have this conversation. But there's a connecting tissue of trust. Mm-hmm. That if there's no trust, it's not going to go well.
And that's where the empathy comes in. You build trust by having that empathetic, authentic self be there, I think.
Yeah.
Again, I mean, if my manager knows they're invested, if I know they're invested in my success, I'm going to take what they're telling me to heart. And if I think they're just out to get me, or if I, just don't have that trust that they're there for me to be successful, then I'm not going to listen as well.
Yeah, that was one of the two things that came up. Trust was the biggest thing with toxic culture. Either I don't trust my leaders or my leaders don't trust me. That trust factor was huge when we did our study for toxic culture, the lack of trust.
Yeah, when we talk about that trust equation, we use this, and I mean we even use it with our customers, right? It's the sum of credibility and empathy, right? And so I think that empathy is such an important part of the equation. It can't be underestimated.
Yeah.
If I can just on the trust theme, one of the firms that I do a little bit of work with, Zenger Folkman, Joe Folkman just came out with a terrific book based on his research on what leaders do to build trust. So that's one, if you want to look at it. I think it's called the trifecta of trust. Joe Folkman, very research-based, but very practical. And what do you do? Yeah, I think one of the themes coming out of this discussion is, I think high performance counts, and I think how you act as a leader counts too. And I think having great coaching skills, the way that Ecolab is invested, and I think building the right level of trust allows for those tougher conversations that Daryl's talking about.
Yeah.
But guys, a lot of conversation we've had in these shows has been discussing the talent gaps that companies are facing. And I think I already know the answer to this, but just so people can hear it clearly again, because some people came in towards the half of the session. Does all this we're talking about help fill that talent gap problem? And how does it help fill the talent gap problem?
Well, yeah, I guess I think it does. I'm trying to how in a lot of different ways it fills that talent gap. But I guess I'll say that I think we've got to continue to spend more time thinking about where for each of our folks, where are they going? What skills do they have? What skills do they want to build? And how do we help them, develop themselves for the future? And we that also gives us a chance to look at that broadly across the organization.
Well, getting people to come to Minnesota is not easy. So you've done a good job.
Hard to get them here, but hard for them to leave once they get here. Jim.
I think a company that really shines in 3 areas and makes them align: that purpose, culture, and brand. And if you want to build that talent gap and attract talent to your company, people do a lot of research on companies today, especially the best and the brightest. If you can get out there and show that your purpose and your culture and your brand, and that's the employee brand, not the product brand's good, but the employee brand, your employee value proposition, if that's all out there and aligned, I think you got a big heads up and a big competitive advantage in that war for skills. And I don't call it a war for talent, I call it a war for skills.
I would add just 3 things on sort of the war for skills or whatever is number 1, you got to stop the leaky bucket. In other words, retention, you got to stop the leaky bucket, right?
Paul says they don't want to leave.
Yeah, well, that's because they're frozen. I live here too. They're frozen. Trust me. But I would say 3 things on the whole talent gap is number 1, retention counts, engagement counts, and that all goes back to quality of management and purpose, like trust. So that's number 1. Number 2, Jay would say the research we've seen lately from I4CP, the high performing companies that don't have the talent gaps are being very creative at talent mobility, having talent marketplaces where managers are not hoarding, but instead we're moving talent all over the place and doing it in some very creative ways. So move your talent around more, develop it more, but then thirdly, look for non-traditional sources of your talent. And I think the pandemic has taught us there's a lot of talent out there that we've been dismissing that I think we can bring in and develop. And those would be my 3.
Yeah, I did a presentation at Ecolab on trends in HR. And I hit the talent mobility one hard because most companies don't do this well. And finally, I was halfway through the presentation on talent mobility, and one of the people in the audience raised a hand and said, Jay, if you had said that 3 years ago, we would have been all over it. But you're telling us something we already know.
Well, it has to permeate though, and I think the notion of having the mindset that this is enterprise, this is company talent. It's not your team's talent. It's not your division's talent. It's not your function's talent. It's our talent collectively, and so we have to continue to drive that mindset to make sure folks don't feel like if someone leaves your team, it's a loss.
One of the neat things I'm seeing as a next practice now is that internal talent marketplace, Kevin, that you mentioned, is beyond just talent mobility, but it's an internal talent marketplace. Just like you have an external gig market, you have an internal gig market. What they're including now is their recent retirees as part of that internal gig market, and people that they can tap into their skills also as they going forward. And as they upgrade their skills, they can upgrade their own profile and have their own brand inside the company, even not only employees, but even recent retirees too.
Or folks that they made a different life choice and want to work part-time. Correct. Or that type of thing.
Or one project at a time.
Or one project. Yep, exactly. So good stuff,
Yeah, good
stuff. So
Hey,
2 things. 1, I know, Paul, you've got to leave us in a second. So I want to have you give a chance to give some final words. Unfortunately, you have another session on the back of this fact. But we have one question we want to address too, which is how do employees get heard by their managers when the trust is not there between manager and upper levels and the employee?
Well, we have a lot of official, mechanisms for employees to feel heard. I do think that I'll just touch on the idea that you brought up, Jay. I think that there are a lot of ways that we're trying to reach our broad base of employees to help them raise their hand when they want to contribute and don't know how.
Yeah.
And I think that's the thing that we've got to keep driving at is how do we find that person who's working in a plant or out in a field role who has skills and they want to contribute in ways different than their day job, and they want to help out, but they just don't know how to raise their hand. We've got to keep finding ways for them.
Well, and the thing that companies don't understand is employees already know how to do this. They have built their own brand on Facebook, on LinkedIn, and things. They know how to build their own brand. They
Or their
can
side
also-
hustle,
It's just a matter of recognize it when they raise their hand. And if they don't get chosen, saying, keep raising your hand, you will get chosen.
Yep. And I'd say that's the last thing I'd want to add, Daryl and team here, is that we have a lot of great processes built for the folks that we know about. There are a lot of high potentials out there within our company. We've got 47,000 people that we don't know about, right? And I want us to find them.
Yeah, find that talent.
Yeah. My counsel on that question would be, and by the way, I get this when I say, hey, be more coachable. And they're saying, hey, how do I coach my boss? Like, well, I'm not talking about that now. But if I was, this is what I would say. Question back to the, if you will, I want to be heard is, what do you want to be heard on? Is it a preference style thing? Or is it mission critical? Is it mission critical to the company, to the values you have? Is it one or the other? Because sometimes we want to be heard on things that really aren't that important, or there's choices to be made. Can you live with it? But if it's really mission critical, and it's not a trusting environment, and from your manager, for others, maybe you've tried, is my advice, and Jay, you can correct me on this, is my advice would be leave. Don't stay. If it's a preference thing, like, come on, let's all grow up. There's
Especially
different.
if you got skills that are in demand, just,
Well, you've got a life. That's like, you got a life, and if this is a miserable place and you got a miserable job and everyone's kind of cutting each other, behind the back, and all that, why?
Yeah.
Why? Now, sometimes you can't jump ship right away, but the tough reality is not every place is going to be as good as Paul's place or, worked, with Jay's research, et cetera. But again, know that is just, I want to be heard on a preference style thing. Like, no, there's different ways of doing things. Or is it really mission critical?
So I'm going to date myself a little bit, but I had good advice from George Odion, who was my mentor. George Odion was the father of management by objectives. His mentor was Peter Drucker, so I knew them both. When I first started my first company, HRI, and I started having employees, and I wasn't a very good manager until George pulled me aside. He said, this is how you would develop people and get people in there. Ask them how you can do a better job. And listen to what they tell you. And that's a way of getting them to coach you to be a better leader. I mean, you can't do everything for them. They may want $1 million a year. You can't do that. But what can you do? Ask them, what can I do to help you be a better employee? What do you want me to do? And
There goes
listen.
Jay, I think that goes to Kevin's point in his book when he makes out sometimes people don't want to hear, they think they know it already.
Yeah.
That was that thing, the end all, whatever the term you use in your book, Kevin, but the idea being, I've already succeeded, I know it all. No one knows it all. We all learn constantly.
And by the way, I'm making $13 million what $13 million a year. What can you teach me? So, wow, this was great, guys. I really, really appreciate Kevin. You bring just a world of expertise, and everybody should buy your book on coachability. So I'll plug it one more time. And Paul, your company and what you're doing at your company, it's a great shining star on the hill. Everybody should look at Ecolabs as one of the better companies in the United States, so, and around the world. So it's you bring a lot of expertise to this panel. So I hope everybody that stayed on, it looks like almost everybody that started did stay on. And we will be posting this in a couple weeks so people can listen to it afterwards. But Daryl, I want to thank them both. I'll let you.
I'm with you.
Yeah.
Thank you guys. Great job. Very much
Thank you.
appreciate your input. Great session, guys. You take
Yeah.
care.
All right. Thank you.
Best
Thank you.
wishes.
Take care now, guys.
Take care.